Thank you for that warm welcome. Again, my name is Tony Garcia. I work for ProPetro Services. I've been there for about 9 years now. Prior to that, I was with the Texas Department of Public Safety working for them. So it's been a great experience being on the industry side and a learning experience also. Just to give you a little background on ProPetro, we're an oil field services company. We specialize in fracking. We also do cementing. We also do some acid work. Like Mike mentioned, we have a yard up there in Vernal, Utah. And we recently bought out Silvertip Completion Services, so they're part of ProPetro now. So if any of you want to have our services done, please feel free to contact us. We'll be happy to start a good working relationship with you all. I've been invited to come up here and speak to you about methods that we can implement to enhance the way we qualify our drivers. And that's precisely what we're going to talk about. That's going to be our main focus of our presentation, is how to enhance what we already do. Now, most of you here today should and already probably know what the FMCSA requires us to do when it comes to DOT-regulated drivers. We understand that the definition in interstate commerce, if you drive a commercial motor vehicle with a gross vehicle weight rating or gross combination weight rating or actual weight of 10,001 pounds, then you're regulated in interstate. So with that being said, FMCSA has established minimum requirements that all motor carriers must put in place to ensure that we qualify our drivers. And when we say minimum, it's the very least that you're required to do. So does that mean that we can do more? Of course we can. We can implement more methods to ensure that our drivers are qualified and also maintain that qualification. So today, our objectives are to briefly review, and when I say briefly, we're going to breeze through what the FMCSRs say about minimum requirements, but then we're going to focus on some methods that ProPetro has implemented within our company to enhance the way we qualify our drivers. And these are using the PreEmployment screening program, which is a PSP report. We're also going to talk about having a continuous driver license monitoring system implemented. And the last point that we're going to talk about is ensuring that Mexican commercial driver's license, we're able to verify that they're actually valid and active if we employ such persons. So let's move on to driver qualification. And before we get started, I just want to put a disclaimer out there. Anything that I say here today is not coming from me. It's all based on the regulations, the FMCSRs. It's stuff that you already know. If you notice on the bottom right of the screen, I posted the regulation where the statement is taken from. So if you go to that specific regulation, it'll tell you everything that we have on the slides, okay? I will also use other reference materials like the auto service criteria, which is a published or a publication from the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance, CVSA, and also I'm going to talk about a bulletin that speaks specifically about Mexican CDLs. So when you go into the regulations in Part 391.11, B1 through B8, FMCSA that the minimum requirements for a driver to be engaged in interstate commerce is they have to be 21 years old of age. The second point is they must be able to read and speak English sufficiently. Doesn't mean that they have to have a master's degrees, but they have to be able to communicate and interact with enforcement personnel. They got to be able to fill out documents. They got to be able to do the ELDs. They got to be able to do a pre-trip inspection. Everything that's related to a DOT driver duty or function, they have to be able to do and understand. They also have to operate safely a commercial motor vehicle, and also they have to be qualified, physically qualified, which they have to undergo a medical examination. Another requirement found in the regs is that a driver has to have a valid driver's license or a valid commercial driver's license. Is there a difference? Yes, remember we spoke about the 10,001 mark? Well, in interstate commerce, 10,001 pounds, gross vehicle weight rating, gross combination weight rating, or gross actual weight, if you're under that, then you become DOT regulated. Now, CDL requirements don't kick in until you get to 26,001 pound. So you can be DOT regulated at 10,001 and yet not require a commercial driver's license, and that's where the difference comes in. Also, when we look in the requirements, it says that a driver has to provide a motor carrier with a certificate of past violation, so we need to know that. The driver must not be disqualified to drive a commercial motor vehicle, and they have to successfully complete a road test. So those are the basic requirements found in the regs for a driver qualification. Now, we all know that when it comes to a crash, and if you get to fight this in court and you're in litigation, you can say many things and say that you've qualified a person, but if you can't prove it, it didn't happen. So you're going to need files and records of you qualifying a person. So 391.51, paragraph A, and paragraph B1 through B9 tells you what needs to go in a driver qualification file. You will see an employment application, and I put in parentheses DOT because it just can't be just a generic application. There's questions that are specific to a DOT driver position. They have to be asked in the employment application. You will also need a copy of the motor vehicle record. You will also need a copy of a road test or equivalent. You will need a copy of a medical examiner certificate and citizen's medical certification status from the licensing state, and you will see that on the MVR. If this applies, if a person is missing a limb or a body part, they will probably need a skill performance evaluation. So only if it applies, you will need a copy of that too. And then there's some annual things that we have to do. Annual NVR, motor vehicle record. Then we must also get an annual list of violations, and then also have an annual review of the annual NVR and certify that that driver is okay to continue to drive. And also in the file, we must contain a note verifying the medical examiner that we used is actually registered in the FMCSA. Other records that are related to this that we must do as a motor carrier is we must maintain records that relate to the investigation of the safety performance history of a driver. This includes a copy of the written authorization, the driver allowing you to do this, previous employer responses or good faith efforts requesting 3-year accident history. And last, request alcohol and controlled substances history through the FMCSA Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse. So all that information is part of the file that we must retain when we qualify drivers for our company. Now, why do we qualify drivers? Well, we know that when we qualify drivers, we're going to have good quality employees. And if we have good quality employees, we know that these will produce good quality work. And also, we must do this because the law mandates us to do it. We want to be able to avoid fines and penalties. And above all, most importantly, we want to be able to prevent crashes and fatalities. But we also want to protect our company. We want to protect our assets from unjustified claims, lawsuits that may result of this. So that's why the reason we qualify our drivers. Now, let's think about this. What else can you do to enhance driver qualification? Because remember we said the things we went over, they're minimum requirements. It's the very least that you must do. What else can we do? Well, the first thing we want to talk about is the pre-employment screening program, which is a PSP report. Is anybody in the audience familiar with this PSP report? There's a few out there. Very good. So just as mentioned in the title, It's a pre-employment screening. In other words, it's designed to give you information before you employ someone, and so that you can make an informed decision. If you actually look at their webpage, the PSP, the FMCSA PSP website, it tells you that if you use the PSP, as an average, most carriers have reduced their crash rate by 8%. And most carriers that are using the PSP have reduced their driver out of service rate by 17%. So if these are issues that you're having with your company, this is maybe a good tool that you can implement when you consider hiring your drivers. So the PSP report will give you a 5-year crash data, and it will give you 3 years of roadside inspection data. It'll display the motor carrier for which a driver was working for at the time of crash or at the time of inspection. It will give you the location and the date of a crash or an inspection. And it will give you details like, for example, injuries, fatalities, or towaways. And also, it will give you details about inspections, the violations that a driver received during a certain stop, specifically if they were placed out of service for it. So all that is information that will be available. Now, in order to pull a PSP report, you have to have driver authorization in order for you to be able to pull that history on him. So when you do the application process, this is something that you need to get consent from the driver. FMCSA believes that making this driver data available is going to allow companies to make more informed decisions when hiring commercial drivers. So it's an important tool to have and to implement in your company if you're able to do so. Now, what does a PSP look like? Well, here's an example. And we're going to call it John Doe number 1. I blocked out the name, the last name, the driver's license, the motor carrier, the US DOT number, just to protect those identities. But if you look at the top of the report, John Doe number 1, you'll see the last name and first name, the license number information in the state. Right beneath that, you're going to see the crash activity, number of crashes that this driver had. You're going to see if there were any fatalities, injuries, or towaways. All that information is going to be there. So if John Doe number 1 had 5 accidents on his record in the previous 5 years, what does that tell you as a motor carrier? You might want to look a little deeper, right? Because he might get involved in a crash in your company, so you have to think about, am I going to hire this person? Now look below that. If you look at the inspection activity for the 3 years history, you're going to see that it gives you the inspection by date, it gives you the DOT number, the carrier name, the driver name, and so forth. But then right underneath that, it'll tell you any violations that this driver got roadside. So I want you to pay attention specifically to those ones that say out of service, which means that this driver got parked, and that this violation is so serious that he may not continue his trip. And that's why he was placed out of service. Now, a lot of companies use the PSPs and they'd like to assign a score. The PSP report does not give a score. It gives you simply the history of a driver so that you can make an informed decision. But look at the pattern and look at the violations found so that you can make an informed decision. For example, on this particular John Doe number 1, what do we see right there highlighted in green? If you can't read it, I'll tell you. It's a driver violation. He got cited for operating a CMV without a valid CDL. Is that someone that you want working for you? If you look at the other violations, there is a lamp violation, a window tint violation, and then if we turn the page, it continues with some more violations, but then in July of 2021, he got cited for not doing ELDs, and he got placed out of service for that. Then a month later, he got another violation, and then a couple months later, again, he got stopped and got placed out of service again for no ELDs. There's a flag. You continue to look at his record, and more violations found. Out of service, some with equipment. Again, ELD, no record of duty status, out of service. And then you continue to look, and then again, driving a CMV while CDL was suspended. And right underneath that, no ELD again. And the list goes on and on. So although there's not an assigned scoring to this John Doe number 1, what is the pattern telling you? The pattern is telling you that you might have CDL issues with this person, or you might have ELD issues with this person if you bring them on board in your company. So you see how using this PSP report can help you make an informed decision. Here's another example, John Doe number 2. Again, we blocked off the personal information, but if you look at this one, it has a lot fewer violations. There's one with lamps, the next page, there's one with ABS, but then there's a bunch of inspections and there's no violations on it. This is what you want to see. Stops that happen but have no violation. That tells you that the driver did a good job in making sure that they did a good pre-trip. This one here simply just tells you that there is no crash or inspection data. If you get one of these, these are very common, all it's telling you is that he's never been stopped. There's no history on this person. It's not telling you that it's a safe driver, it's just telling you there's no history. A couple of reasons. He might be a new driver. He might be in an area where law enforcement or CVE is not present as much, so he's not getting stopped, or he's just lucky, right? So just be careful with this. No inspection or crash data doesn't necessarily mean that it's a safe driver. So if you think that the PSP program is something that can work for you, this is the webpage where you can find more information or you can enroll. Feel free to use it. It's a tool that we at ProPetro have implemented, and it's helped us keep our DQ compliance 100%. Let's talk about continuous driver license monitoring. Am I good on time? I feel like I've been long-winded. I'll try to make this a little brief. So when it comes to continuous driver license monitoring, we mentioned that the FMCSRs indicate the minimum requirements. And the minimum requirements say that you must have a current driver's license or CDL. You cannot be disqualified. You have to have a copy of the MBR. You must do your annual checks. The question is, what happens in between? You did your initial, but then you're not due to do another one until 12 months later. What if a driver, their license gets revoked or suspended in between? Of course, you're doing the minimum, but what else can you do? So that's where this comes in. Continuous driver license monitoring. Now, I'm not here to promote any particular vendor or provider. Each and every one of us have to do our own homework and investigate which one works better for us. But when it comes to selecting one, I recommend that you make sure on the following. Make sure that that provider connects to the state driver's license agency that issues the driver's licenses to your employees, that is directly connected to the state. Also, that it sends you, as they occur, alerts of all driving violations such as DWIs, speeding, illegal maneuvers, or more. And also that it sends you alerts for non-driving offenses, license status changes due to suspensions, revocations, and expirations, or when there's medical certificate downgrades. As they happen, you will get these notifications and you can pull those drivers off the truck so that they're not out there driving in a disqualified state. So the benefits of having a continuous driver's license monitoring, it's going to allow motor carriers to have control. It's going to allow you to be in the know regarding the CDL status of a driver. It can help motor carriers to remove unsafe or unqualified drivers from driving. It can also help to prevent crashes that may result in serious injuries and fatalities. And also remember that reducing or eliminating crashes reduces claims, and it protects the company and our assets. And in the cases where a claim does exist, proving that your company goes above and beyond what the minimum requirements are shows good safety protocols and good practices on your behalf. So those are some of the benefits that come with having a continuous driver license monitoring. Let's talk about Mexican CDL verification. According to the American Trucking Association, ATA, article published in October of 2021, they made this comment: industry is short 80,000 drivers today and may be short 160,000 drivers by the year 2030. It's a big number. As a result of this, industry has been left to deal with supply and demand issues, frustration, and in search for alternate options. One of those options is seeking or exploring with a possibility of hiring Mexican drivers or persons with Mexican commercial driver's licenses. To give you a little history on this, back in 1991 in November, the US and Mexico signed a memorandum agreeing to having reciprocity and recognition of each other's CDLs. In March of 1994, Transport Canada came into the same agreement. So now we're able to interchange, or drivers with a Mexican CDL are able to operate in the US and in Canada. In the same way, our drivers can operate in Mexico or in Canada. Now, the intent of this program was for Mexican commercial driver's license holders. They were authorized for border crossing and international movements only. That means that the trip has to begin either in Mexico and end up in the US, and then they go back to Mexico. That was the intent of this program. Or they can go from Mexico into the US all the way to Canada, make a drop, and then come back into Mexico. That was the intent of the program. So the question is, can a US motor carrier employ a person with a Mexican CDL? Well, the reference is there. Section 383.23, Regulatory Guidance, question number 1 says that yes, you can. Only if a Mexican CDL holder is authorized to work in the US, which means that they have to go through the Homeland Security clearance and immigration, the CBP and all that. They have to have a worker's permit to work for a US company. Mexican CDLs must also be authorized to drive in the US, so you have to check their driver's license to make sure there's no restrictions indicating that they can't operate in the United States. And also, Mexican CDL drivers must comply with all the same requirements as a US driver does, which means that they have to do ELDs, they have to do the pre-trips, they have to do the driver qualification steps, everything they have to do as a US driver. And they have to maintain a current and active driving status. So for enforcement officials, the way they check validity of a Mexican CDL is they go through NLITS and CIDLIS, which are federal systems that they use to check if a CDL is valid. For motor carriers, what can we do? Here is a link to the Secretaría de Transportes y Comunicaciones in Mexico. It's a website that you can go into and check for validity of a Mexican CDL. Basically, it'll take you to this webpage. Well, you'll type in the CDL number, the medical preventive number, and then you type in the code and then do a search on it. And it'll tell you if the driver's license is valid. Once you have confirmation, this is the way to prove that the Mexican CDL is valid in the US. Now, I'm not telling you to go ahead and hire or do not hire. It's your decision. But I will tell you that there are risks involved. What are some of those risks? Well, if you're using a US-based provider for CDL verification, these may not be able to verify validity with the Mexican authorities. So that's a risk. Also, you're not going to be able to do continuous driver license monitoring, may not be available because nothing connects to the Mexican SET. And also, if there's issues with the SET electronic system, or if there's internet connection issues, then you will not be able to verify. And keep in mind that plastic formats of the CDLs from Mexico will phase out as of March 31st, 2025, which means they're only using e-licenses now. You can only verify it electronically. And there is no such thing as good faith efforts provided by the FMCSA when it comes to certifying that a Mexican CDL is authorized. There's no such thing. So we have that responsibility of making that verification. Regulatory guidance, out-of-service criteria has got some good pictorials on how to check Mexican CDLs. You can also refer to this inspection bulletin published by the CVSA. And of course, there is a website there for your convenience if you want to reach out to them. So in this presentation today, we went over some enhancements that you can put into place to improving the way you qualify drivers using the PSP program, also implementing a continuous driver license monitoring, and if you plan to employ people with Mexican CDLs, what to do to make sure they're verified. Any questions? All right, thank you.